Alrighty, so it is 12:01 Eastern, and seems we are ready for the webinar. So again, this webinar is going to be the last one in our introductory Lunch and Learn series. And last week, basically, what are reports, how to get into reports, and then potentially how to make your first report. In this webinar, I want to go just a little bit deeper. I'm not going to go crazy into anything. So this will be kind of a next step in reporting. I'll call this advanced reporting because that is what the program calls it, the project team system calls it advanced reports. So I want to kind of take a deeper dive into all of that. So creating groups, potentially creating something called a repeating group. So if you have multiple groups on a document on something like a field report, I want to be able to show that, show tabular data within a report, but also maybe we want to show one page per, or one record per page in a report. So we don't want it to look tabular. We actually want kind of more of a printout view. We'll talk about sorts, we'll talk about filters, we'll get into all that. But before I do that, I just want to kind of go over some of the basics as usual. As I mentioned in the very beginning, my name is Josh Whitmer, and I'm a product manager here at ProjectTeam. Today's agenda will be pretty typical from what you've seen if you've been on our earlier Lunch and Learn sessions. Today will be a 5-minute introduction, which we're doing now, 30 minutes into advanced reporting concepts. We'll actually go over some really good examples, and then I'll spend the last 5-10 minutes, whatever we need there, for questions and answers. As I always say, if you have questions that I don't get to, or if you have something that comes up after the call, just make sure you email or call in. I'll give you the contact information after that. We try to do a really good job of answering all the questions. Also, as I always say on these, we are social, so you can follow us on our different social media outlets. Especially a good one is YouTube. We post the recordings of these videos on YouTube. You can find previous recordings on YouTube. Lots of good videos on there. So, YouTube and Facebook, Instagram, those are all good ones to follow us just to get news and what's happening within ProjectTeam. And then finally, I just want to make sure I say that this is being recorded. So if, again, it will be on YouTube, but if you want something kind of sent to you through email, we can do that. It'll also be posted on our website. Alrighty, so that is all I have from the PowerPoint section. So it's time to get into the system. I'm starting off in my project home page. I'm going to skip kind of the login, things like that, because we are kind of focusing this webinar on reports. As mentioned on last week's call, the reporting area within projects is listed on the left side navigation. I'm mostly going to be spending time inside of a project, but I do want to be clear that companies and company administrators can actually run reports outside of projects and intermingle data from multiple projects. Okay, that's all going to be based on what we call categories, which is consistent between what's at the company side and the project side. So the user interface is very consistent. There's just a couple more things that you can do at the company side. Maybe if I have time at the end of this, I can jump in there just to kind of do a very quick overview. But a good example of that is if I want to show, where my contracts or how my budget is doing across my projects instead of just one individual project, I could run a report there to show that data. So as I'm in this project, I'm going to go into the reports area. When I do that, I get to the report home page. I do have these 3 folders here. I can open up and run existing reports and everything that I might have in here. But I'm not going to be running any of these system reports today. I want to actually create a couple of reports from scratch. One thing that I always say to new clients, when we're working with people in the sales process or in the support process, is reporting is not hard. Okay, a lot of people believe when they get into reports it's going to be overwhelming. It's not really. What we built ProjectTeam reports to be very similar in many ways to kind of Microsoft Excel, that seems to be a very, you know, in some ways easy to use, familiar system. So you'll see as I'm working through this, a lot of those concepts in cells and formatting is all very consistent. So again, reporting is not hard. I'm going to get into this advanced report area. So it's the top option that I have in this list. I went over the different options that you have in the previous webinar. Again, I like advanced reports most. It gives you the most flexibility, and that's where I'll stay pretty much all of today during this conversation. So I'll click into advanced reports. The first report that I want to show, because of the data that I have in here in this sample project, but you know, all of these concepts that we go through will work on any form type, or in reporting speak, category that we want to show. It's just going to be on RFIs. So RFIs is a pretty simple form, but I want to show you some concepts that we can work into a report, even working off of something like a simple RFI form. So the first screen that I get to is putting in a name of my report. So this one is going to be, this report is going to be RFIs by schedule impact, let's say, because that's important to me, and I want to, in some ways, show that. After I put the name in, I'm just going to select a folder. So I'm going to say My Access to make it easy. That means only I can see this report. If I want to change that later, I can. But for this example, I'll just say My Access only. Next is going to be categories. We talked about categories last time, but I'm just going to search for the category that I want. And in this case, I'm just going to be making an RFI report, and really just off of top level data. So I'm going to pull in RFIs. You will see the other request for proposal, which really in some ways knows nothing about RFIs by default, does get grayed out. We do have this RFIs reviewers showing up, and that's because we have a collection on our RFI, and that automatically knows, so there is a relationship there. That's why it's still available. I'm not going to be pulling that category in there, but that's the difference on why things grayed out versus some still appear in the black text. Next to my categories, I'll pick my sort. So the sort is going to be just RFI number, and I could drag and drop that over, or double click the arrow, or click the arrow. Lots of ways to get it over there, but I do want to sort on RFI number. Next, I'm going to skip filters because I do want to actually show all of the data from my RFIs and go to layout. So I'll click on layout. In my layout, I just want to kind of show the data that is most important to me. I don't need to, in this example, show large amounts of text. So I'm going to skip things like the answer and question, because I think it just kind of muddies up the report look in the way that I'm looking to get this. So the first field that I want to pull over is RFI number. You'll notice when I pull the RFI number over to the right-hand side, and this is the, I guess it's called the data field section, it's automatically going to build a sample of your report on the bottom. So I pulled RFI number over. I can see now that I have one column called RFI number, and it shows, you know, a sample of data, RFI 1 through 4. Next, I'm going to pull the subject, then maybe a due date, let's say a cost impact, and maybe my schedule impact. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns within my report. I could do some things here by doing some summaries. So if I wanted to count the number of RFIs that I have, I can say count. I can show that at the grand total. So I can click this button, and you'll see that this count for report shows up in the little view here. That's kind of a nice, easy way to add counts and sums and things like that. But for now, I'm going to take that off, and I don't really need to show that. So I'm going to say none there. So that looks fine. I'm just going to finish that. Now that I have this report, if I were to run this, it would look fine, but it's not going to be very pretty. The thing that I always like to do, first thing, is go into the options, general, and fit to my page width. Because I don't have that much long text, I'm going to keep it as page orientation portrait, but you could turn this to landscape. And then we did have a question last time about paper size. If I want to be able to print like a legal page, I could change my paper size to that. But for now, I'm just going to say portrait, letter, and say OK. Once I do that, if I simply run this report, we'll see the data that I get, and things are looking OK. I've got 7 RFIs in here. I definitely want the 7 or the number there to show my leading zeros. So that's one thing I want to change. I want to center that. I want to center the due date. I want to show cost impact as $1, and maybe I even want to show the 2 decimals to give me the sense there. And then it shows me my cost impact, true, true, false. I don't, the true, true, false, that's because I have a field on my form that is a checkbox, but I don't like the way it says true or false. So I'm going to change that. The other thing that I wanted to do, and the point of me creating this, is I want to actually call out or create groups of my schedule impact. So I want the things that have a schedule impact in one group and that do not have a schedule impact in another group, because that makes sense to me on this report. So lots of things that I want to do so far on this report. What I'll do is I'll go back to the edit mode. First thing that I'm going to do is click into details. On the left-hand side of your report, you have the different sections of that report. By default, you have a page header, which shows at the top of the page and actually each page. You can add and then you have a detail, which is just the repeating level of information. If I say add section, I have other options here. I can do things like a report header, which is going to show at the very top of your report, but not necessarily on each page. I see page header and detail are already grayed out because they're added. A report footer is going to show at the bottom of the overall report, not on each page. A page footer, which is going to show up on each page. And that's good for something like showing the date that it was run. If you want to put your company name in there to say, I'm the one that made this report, certainly you can do that in the page footer. And then we also have this group stuff, group header, group footer, and a repeating group. And I'm going to skip repeating group for this first example, but I will talk about that next time. So what I want to do is I want to group by my schedule impact. If I say that I'm going to create a group header here, and I'm going to look for schedule impact, I do not see that. So I have RFI, which is my category. And then if you remember when I was setting up this report, I have one sort field, which is RFI number. That's why when we ran the report, it said 1, 2, 3, all the way to 7. So if I want to group by schedule impact, I'm actually going to need to add that as a sort. We'll cancel this for now. I can't get back to the wizard that I originally was using to create the report, but I can get back to all of those options by clicking that gear icon and then clicking sorts. It's going to show me that one sort that we already added for RFI number, but I am going to pull over schedule impact as well. In the way that this looks right now, I've got RFI number sorted first, and then underneath of that, my schedule impact. Since I just have flat data, that doesn't make too much sense. And actually, it's only really going to respect, I think, that RFI number unless there was 2 same RFIs or 2 RFIs with the same number. So I'm going to switch that. I'm actually going to put, by using these arrows, schedule impact first. So that's going to be the thing I sort on first. And then RFI number below that. So I kind of group all of those schedule impacts at a true versus a false. So I'll say OK there. Once I do that, if I click back to details, add section, group header, I will see now that I have a schedule impact available to me. So I'll go ahead and click that and say OK. Now I can take this data and either I can copy and paste it, or I could have just dragged it over if I don't want to show it in this column as well. But for this example, I'll continue to show it here, and I can put that in here. So I'm just going to copy and paste that. Within each section of your report, you can add more rows. So I can click on something and say add, or I can click on that little 4, so the cell number, say add row after. I can just drag all of these headers down to that side. In here to kind of add some color, I'll maybe make this some light gray. I can take this schedule impact that looks a little bit squished because the name is long, but it wouldn't look squished if I ran it because it was just a true false. And I can expand this to the all the cells, similar to what we could do in Excel. I can make this bold. I can change this to some kind of blue color and change the text to a white color. So this looks pretty good. If I run, actually before I run that, all I've done is group. Okay. If I do run this, and I can either run that or export it, and sometimes I like to actually export it to PDF because I can scroll a little bit easier. I do see that I'm getting good data here. So I haven't changed any of the formatting of the actual detail cells, like adding the leading zeros or the cost impact showing the dollar sign. But I do have two groups. The first group is just a false group, which means to me there's a schedule impact that is unchecked. And then I have a second group that is showing me my true schedule impact, or a check, or yes. So that's pretty cool. I'm going to go back to the edit mode. I'm going to fix the formatting. So I'm going to change this to centered. I can go up here, this little square icon here is for formatting. And I can say, you know what, I'm going to add it, or I'm going to make it as text. I don't want it to read it as a number. I want to read it as text because I do have leading zeros. I also want to say cost impact. I'm going to right align that. Same thing, I'm going to format it. I do want this to be a number this time. I want to add the currency symbol. If I wanted to, I could also add my decimal places here. So I could add the 2 decimal places. And depending on the currency you're using and what that looks like, you can change things like some currencies, instead of a period, you can use a comma and change this to whatever currency symbol you want. But that looks good. So I'm going to say that. I can also move the header to the right-hand side. And then I'll just center align that. If I look at the report that we previously ran, it's looking pretty good, but it's looking a little bit cramped in here. Maybe I want to add space between my false section and my true section. So to do that, I'm just going to go back to my report edit mode, click on the 4, add a row before that. So now this row here, which I've highlighted in that light blue, if you can see that, is just an empty row. Okay, so that's going to add some spacing. If I run this report or export this to PDF, I will see now things are looking a little bit better. I've got a due date, which I probably should center, but I've got an RFI number, subject, due date, cost impact. These are looking a lot better. And I do have my 2 groups that are spaced out a little bit nicely. So that looks pretty cool. The next thing that I want to do is go into a little bit of formulas. So let's say at the bottom of each section or group, my schedule impact group, I want to actually count the number of RFIs that are in that group. So just like I can add a group header, I can also add a section for group footer. So I'll go ahead and add that. Same thing, it's going to ask me what am I going to choose as my my category or my sort for this. And I'm going to say schedule impact so that it matches what I have here. I could choose something else. If you want to get the actual count or the sum or whatever aggregation that you want based on the sort that or the group that you already have, I recommend using that same that option. So in here, I want to count the number of RFIs within a group. So at the top, I can see this little formula editor. In the past, we've used a lot of this formatting. Now we're going to go into formulas. So if I click on formulas, I get a whole bunch of different functions or formulas that I can start to add in. If I open up any of these, I can see there's a whole bunch of aggregation functions, logical date functions if I want to add dates, which I will in a little bit. But for now, I'm going to actually sort for the word count. We have different options here. The thing that I want is just an aggregate count of what's in the grouping. Whenever you add a form or a function, it does give you all of this little help text to help you fill in what should be used to complete the function. So kind of in small text, if you can see it, it says ag count, and then we want the field in the category to count. So we need to choose a field in here. At the top left of the screen or this window, I do have all of my fields broken up by my categories. And since I only have one category, it only shows me that one. What I can do here, this is already highlighted in blue, saying that whatever I add is going to overtake what's highlighted. I can choose any of these. Probably the best one to do is document ID because that is unique. So if I add document ID in there, now it's going to say, give me a count of all of the document IDs. And I'll say, okay. That looks neat. I can go in here and maybe add a border to the top of that to give you my kind of the area. I did say I wanted to center that, and maybe I'll center this. So I've added my first function or my formula for ag count. If I run this, let's just make sure that it looks okay. So this is giving me, or telling me that I have 4 RFIs that do not have a schedule impact and 3 that do. So that looks kind of nice. Without, if I had 100 and 300, and I just saw the number 100 down here, I might not know too much about what that 100 is referencing. So in a formula, so if I go back to the formula here, I have kind of the thing, the function, the formula that's giving me a number, but maybe I want to add some kind of text to this to give some point of reference. I can go before this, and I can add in quotes something like the word count. I can also add colons, whatever I want to do within that text. I'm going to add a space after my colon and then the ending quote so that the word count colon does have a space before it gives me the number. If I just save this, it will not work. I need to add the ampersand symbol to kind of join these things together. So now I have a count, an and sign, and then the actual count. If I say okay here, just to show, and I run this report, and I've kind of been flipping back and forth between run and PDF, but both are similar. This gives me my count, and then it's showing me that count. So that looks pretty nice. The next thing that I want to do, let's say, is a sum. So I did a simple count. Let's sum this cost impact. So I can go back to edit mode. And I'm starting to get a lot of things on the top. So like I said before, we can right click on that, close all tabs. It closes everything but my current tab. Similar to what we did with count here, we can add a sum. So I'm going to go click on the cell. So what is it? D8. Click on the formula. This time, instead of count, I'm going to type sum, and I have 2 options here. I'm going to use the aggregate, so the ag sum. And same thing, I can either choose one of these fields. Instead of summing the document IDs, which probably doesn't make much sense because the document IDs are just kind of random, unique identifiers, we are going to actually sum on the cost impact. So I'm going to take that data. I'll say okay there. It's showing up aligned to the left, but I can, same thing, right align it, go to my format, make it a currency number, and say okay. If I run this report, now I should have a total that is counting, and then I also have a sum that is taking the total amount of my cost impact. Next, let's get into some, or another formula here might be an if statement. So at the top, when I run this report, it doesn't tell me much information. It says false, which maybe I have no idea what that means, and true, which again, without any context, I don't really know. If I just got this handed on my desk, I don't know what false versus true means. So let's add some context to that. So what we can do is we can click into that cell, so A5, add another formula. This is saying request for information schedule impact, which is why it's saying true or false, because it's based on a checkbox. We can add an if statement here and say that we're going to add an if. You can click on the if and see kind of a summary or a preview of what's going to happen. If the condition is true, returns a result, otherwise returns an alternative. So that's okay. So we're going to say if there. It added the if statement, parentheses, and then our field, which is the cost impact. And I'm going to say if the schedule impact is, let's say, true, and I need to put any text in quotes. So it says if the schedule impact is true, or is the checkbox is checked, I'm going to return a result that says RFIs with schedule impact. Otherwise, and what would otherwise mean? In a checkbox example, it's pretty simple. It's either checked or not checked. So in this case, what do I want to return if it is false? In other examples, you could put if statements within if statements. So if I have a pick list or something like that, you could do all kinds of things. If statement might not be the best option there, but you do have options in your formulas. So if it is false, I'm going to say RFIs without, well, actually, let's make it more obvious, with no schedule impact. I can't quite see, so with no schedule impact, that makes sense to me. And say, okay, if I do that and I run this report again, let's hope that our headers make a little bit more sense. So now I can see RFIs with no schedule impact up front. That's better to me than showing false. And then RFIs with schedule impact, that's a lot better than just saying true. Next, on the right-hand side, we have schedule impact as false and true. Okay, but maybe we want to show some kind of symbols. So we can get into icons. And the icons are just going to be font icons, which in the reporting tool are going to use webdings and wingdings. So if I search on Google for a cheat sheet for webdings versus wingdings, I'll get something that looks like this. And this is going to show you what each character, letter, number, symbol is going to match up with for the corresponding character of that font type. So for example, let's say that in my schedule impact, if it is a yes, I want to show a check mark. If it's a no, I want to show an X mark or icon. That means to me that I'm going to, same as I did before, so just building on what we already know, I'm going to add an if statement. I'm going to say if the schedule impact is true, I want to show a lowercase a, which is going to translate to a check mark. If it's false, I want to show a lowercase r, which if we add the right text or the font is going to show a little, or I guess an X. Let's do that, okay? I'm going to go back to edit mode. I'm going to click on this field this time and go into my formula. Just like we did before, we're going to show an if, not a fly, but an if statement. And same thing, so if request for information schedule impact equals true, like I said, we're going to show a lowercase a. Okay? So true should be a lowercase a, which is a check. For webdings, you can use all these different symbols, but I'm just using a check versus an X. The other one is going to be a lowercase r. So I'll say lowercase a versus lowercase r. Actually, okay there. If I were to just run this right now, literally it would give me an A versus an R. Okay, so that's not bad. It at least is giving me what I would expect it to as it's written. But I can change the font. Right now, the default font is Arial, but I can scroll down to any of these different font types. And at the bottom somewhere, I have these two options. The first one, I believe, is Webdings. The second one is Wingdings. And it is actually written in that. So I'm going to check this first one. That gives me all these convoluted icons here because it's literally translating each character I wrote to a symbol. So I can't really read that. If I double click into that, I can read it. Or if I click the FX or the formula, I can read it again. But as it shows on here, it's giving me that. So that's okay. So I can run this report and hopefully we'll get a check mark versus an X. And now I can see RFIs with no schedule impact that shows me the X, and RFIs with a schedule impact that shows me the check. So easy to add those different icons in. I'll show another example of that in a second. And then finally, on this RFI report, what I do want to show is just some conditional formatting. So let's say, for whatever reason, on this RFI report, if a cost impact is, let's say, greater than $2,000, I want to show it as yellow because that's important to me. If it's greater than, let's say, $4,000, I want to show it as red because that's super important to me. So I can go in here and I can click on cost impact. I have these options at the top, but I could also right-click on this cell and go into my format of cells. Here I've got number, borders, and conditions, and this is the one that I'm going to work on. So in this condition, like I said, I want to maybe change the background color of this depending on what the value is. So I'm going to add two conditions. So add and add. I can do this one at a time so I don't have to go too far in the beginning. The first one is going to be a background color. I said I wanted to make that some kind of, let's say, a light yellow for things that are over $2,000. I want to say FX or formula. And we're kind of doing a lot with this if statement, but it is powerful. So I'm going to say if cost impact is greater than 2,000, and since that's a number, not text, I do not need to put it in quotes. I'm just going to say here, I'm going to return true, otherwise I'm going to say false. And this is just going to say, should I run this condition or not? And say, okay there. I can also add a second condition to say the background color should actually turn a reddish color. Let's say this red. And same thing, so I'm going to add the if. I'm just going to increase the number. So I'm going to say if the cost impact is greater than, let's say, 4,000, we're going to say true. Otherwise, we're going to say false. And say OK there. Say OK here, and then let's run that report. Now I've got a report that's highlighting things based on a condition of what the cell value is. Okay, again, this could be done on any different cell, but it makes sense here for my cost impact. It's not only highlighting the background color of the cost impact. I can do things like make the text bold, make the text red, make it strike through, suppress it if it doesn't really matter to me. Whatever I want to show, I can do that through those formatting. Okay. And then the last thing that I want to do on this report before I jump into my field report will be to add some kind of, I've got a due date in here. Maybe if it's, plus 10 days, then it becomes critical, or there's some email that I need to send out to whoever's responsible there to say, hey, this is going to impact the actual schedule now. So I want to add some kind of math to this due date field. So I'm going to go back to the edit mode. In here, I've got these columns: RFI number, subject, due date, cost impact, schedule impact. I can choose any of these and say I want to insert a column. So I'm going to insert another one after. It doesn't know what it is, so it just gives me the letter. I can go into that, and now I can add either, I could copy and paste a field. I could drag and drop a field. Like if I wanted to put answer in there, I could just drop the answer in there. That's not what I want right now. I'm going to add some kind of formula again. So I'm going to add a formula. This time, I'm going to be working with dates. Okay. So in here, I've got this function for all these dates. Date difference. What's the difference between today and the due date to say how many days overdue, etc. This one, I'm going to say a date add. If I add that, it's going to allow me to see and hear what am I going to be adding. The first option, it says to give me my interval. Do I want years, days, weeks, months, etc. It says, but I do have to put it in quotes. So first I'm going to say days. I want to say number of days. The quantity, I'm going to say if it's 10 days over the due date, or the due date, I can add that. Say okay there. Again, I'll make this centered. I can change the title of this, impact date, maybe makes sense to me. I can copy the formatting from this cell over to this cell, so it's bold and has a gray background. I can just click this format painter, put that on there. And then I can, same thing here. I'm going to format paint this so it has the bar right there, and then run that report. So on this report now, we've done a lot, and you can carry this over to any of your different reporting examples. We've worked a lot with formatting. We introduced a group. We did conditional statements. We turned some values to icons with that schedule impact versus check versus not checked. We did math on dates and all of that. We added counts. We added sums to the bottom rows. If I wanted to say, you know what, that looks great. I've got 4 and 3, but I also want to add an overall report summary. I can go back to edit mode, and this is the last thing I'll do on here. I can say add section. I'm just going to say a report footer. So give me everything that's in the report. And I can actually just copy and paste these two things right into the report area. And let's say I don't really want any border on here, so I can get rid of that. And I can make this bold. And what's going to happen is, because this right here and this one were within this grouping based on schedule impact, it's only going to count based on those. Since I now have that same data, that same formula showing up below a grouping, it's going to count everything regardless of my groups. So if I run this report, even though it's the same exact formula, it depends on where you put it within the sections of the groups. If I run this, now you can see my overall count. So let's say I have a lot of data on here, and sometimes I just want the summary level information. And I can now see I've got 7 RFIs, which have a total cost impact of about $17,000. So The next report that I want to work on, and I'm not going to go step by step as much and format as much, but I do want to introduce another concept, which is repeating groups. So in this RFI report, we have one group. So we have a group for schedule impact, and then the details, which is the repeating information, and then the end of the group. What if we have something that has multiple groups? For example, if I go into my forms and I click on my field reports, in here I can go into any of these field reports, and I see data on here that actually is the top level field report data, so subject, date, work description. And then I have two fields, which are a subset of other fields. So visitors, and I've got 4 fields in there, and then a weather, which is 3 fields. So now I've got something that's going to include multiple groupings per actual form. So let's go ahead and work on that. So I'm going to save this, and I can close out all of these if I want to, just to get that, and I'll close that in a second. I'm going to create a brand new report. Again, I'm going to do advanced reports. This time I'm going to go just a little bit quicker. In the name area, this is my field report with multiple, let's say, make it better, weather and visitors. Again, I'll put it in my access, in my categories. This time I'm going to search for the categories that make sense. So I'm going to search for field reports. I'm going to pull field reports in there. Like I said before, these two are not grayed out because they do have something to do with field reports. We saw a second ago that these were collections on our field report. So I'm going to actually bring both of those over here. So this report's going to have 3 total categories in there. Next, what I want to do is put my sort. So my sort is going to be on date. I'm not going to filter out any data. And for now, I'm going to skip the layout. Last time we started with the layout. This time I'm going to skip the layout and finish. If I finish without putting a layout in, it's going to show me pretty basic data. The first thing that I want to do is put in my overall data for my field reports. So if I look at my field report category, I'm going to pull in my date. And actually, let's do this. Say date. Okay. And let's make that bold. And then I can also go in here and say this is my subject or my field report title or something. I'm going to put that in here, and I can grow this to multiple cells. If I just run this right now, I'm not making, like in the last example, it was almost like I was putting date here, subject here, etc. And I was expecting these rows, these 4, these rows in this 4th row to repeat. This time, I'm putting that header data within the detail. So let's see what happens when I do that. If I run that report by putting that header data inside of the detail, I'm getting a whole bunch of data that looks a little bit funny to me. I'm getting data that repeats and all that, and I don't necessarily want that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back into the field reports here. I'm going to add a section. I'm going to say I want to add a repeating group. In here, I can choose a repeating group for the data that I want. So I'm going to say for each field report, now I've got a group within that. I'm actually going to be adding 2 repeating groups, but to just start with this one, I'm going to say, this repeating group is going to be actually on visitors. So I'm going to say here, this is going to list my visitors. I can make that bold and underlined, and I can add insert below it. And for my visitors collection or category, I have these options. So the first thing I'm going to add is my row number. My row number. And then I'm going to add maybe the name of the visitor, and then maybe reason for a visit, just kind of reading some of the fields that I have on the left-hand side. And then maybe I want to say time on site makes sense. I can, just like I did before, format this to a light gray, make this bold. That makes sense. Now I can start to pull in my fields. So I've got the detail area here for this repeating group. Say my name, the reason for a visit, that might be kind of long, so I'll expand that. And then the time on site, I'll pull that in there. Next thing I want to do, because I also have weather that I want to repeat for each field report. I want to say add another section, another repeating group on field reports. Now I have 2 sets of repeating data. So this time I'm going to pull weather in there. So just like I did before, I'm going to say this is weather. This is going to be the time, weather, and actually, I guess this is degrees. This would be my weather condition. Same thing, I'll say bold and underline, and this should be bold and gray. And I can just pull that in. So time, degrees, weather condition. Let's see what happens. So if I run this report now I've got two repeating groups of data in there. Now it's going to show me kind of nicer data. It's not repeating all that extra stuff right now. I can see here that I've got the first date or the first field report now highlighted in blue. So field report for 4/22 had 3 weather and 2 visitors. Date or field report for 4/23 had 4 weather and 1 visitor. So instead of repeating all that data, now I've created separate sections of groupings. So this is a grouping, and this is a grouping, repeating on that data. From here, same thing, we can do some nice things. But the biggest thing I want to do is show that this is showing one by one, these forms one by one, but it's a little bit cramped. Maybe I want to break this out in some way so that each field report shows up on a separate page. To do that, I'm going to go back to the edit mode. I'm going to add a section for, let's say, my group footer. And I'm going to say for each field report, and because I have that section in there, that's fine, but I'm actually going to add a page break there, and I'm going to suppress that row so it actually doesn't show up. And then if I run this to PDF, this should give me an output that I'm actually looking for. So now I've got report number 1, which is on 4/22, shows me all of the data about that field report for that day. If I go to the second page, this is report for 4/23 and all of the data about that for that page. Okay, so I went through that repeating groups pretty quickly, but it just gives an example of being able to kind of report on multiple groupings of data. This is all within the same form, the field report form, but this could work across different forms. You would just need something to join on. Since I know that a weather collection is joined to a field report, or if the system knows that, automatically creates those joins. Okay. So I went through the 2 different reports, and I'll show those back on the screen. So here's my field reports with weather and visitors. You could do really cool things. I'm at the 45-minute mark right now, so in respect for everybody's time, I won't do this. But you could do the same things where weather condition, rain versus sun. If you look at the different symbols, you could make this a little, raindrop versus a sun. You could say if it's sun, then I want that text to be orange. So my little icon that's a sun looks like a sun, and if it's rain, it should be blue. You could, add this up. You could add a little degree symbol and then an F there by doing that ampersand quote, and then that F for degrees Fahrenheit. Really anything that you want to do, I think, kind of given the information that I presented in last week's webinar and then this week's webinar, if you kind of combine some of those, I think you should be able to create some really, really nice reports, all keeping in mind the biggest thing that I think you need to understand when you're making reports is dealing with the sections, okay? This is the biggest thing. What's a page header? Page header shows up once, actually every time on the top of every page, just like it does. So if I look at this one here, I can see field reports with weather and visitors, and if I go to the next page, field reports with weather and visitors. If I added, just really quickly, another section, report header, and I put this created by Josh, okay, and I run this to PDF, I will see created by Josh at the top of this one, because this is the top of my report. If I go to the next page, I do not see created by Josh. So a page header shows up on every page. A report header only shows up at the top of your report. Same thing with our RFI report. We put that report footer at the bottom that gives us our overall count and our overall sum. That only shows up once. It's at the very bottom of the overall report, not going to show on every page. Although we could show things like page totals and all that. Let me just run that report really quickly again, just to show that. So I've got schedule impact, and I can run this as a PDF. So these are the 2 reports that we worked on. So at this point, kind of open it up, see if anybody has questions. Let me see here if I open up the screen. And it looks like we still got a lot of people on the call here. So if you have any questions at all about the things that I went over, feel free to shout those out, or actually, I guess, type them into the question box, and I will do my best to add them. So the first one, can you change the font or the A and R instead of the whole cell using WebDings? I believe that you can change the font within a cell. So if I change, so that's a good point. I don't know if you can say one single piece of data within that, but certainly you could join cells, and if you wanted text to go before that or something like that, you could do that. Make sure. Could you add ball and court for each RFI? Certainly you could do that. So that's either a field that you have on there, or there is a category. So if I go into categories, there's a lot of options you have. One of the categories that you have is your workflow. So if you're relying on workflow to kind of determine your ball and court, you could pull in your workflow so that it might say, here's RFI, in this case, RFI number 3. It's at the 3rd step in the workflow, and it's currently waiting on, Josh Whitmer or whoever that is. So yes, you could certainly pull in ball and court and all of that. Could you pull in images? There are image types that you can pull in here. So if I go in, there's another category, let's say, for my company logo. This is an example of an image. And I can say, I'm going to load image, and it's going to be my company logo. It shows up there, and now when I export that, let's say to PDF, I have my logo showing up in my report. Right now, the way it's set up, the logo is showing up, across all my cells, but you could format that or make that smaller if you wanted to. There are other images that you can link in there. So if you have a public image on some web page or something, you can pull that in. One question for currency, could you have the $sign left justified instead of tight versus to the dollar? I think in the formatting of that, you cannot, but that would be an easy fix to just add a column to the left and put the $sign in there if you wanted to. And now that would show on the left, and this would show on the right. So just a matter of formatting your report in some way to show the data, the look of that, however you want. And then just to show, I guess, if we want to see this, but what would happen as an example if we put the RFI number ahead of the sort for schedule impact? If I go to my sorts here, it's just going to reorder things and make things look a little funny. If I say RFI number first and then schedule impact, instead of the other way around, and then export that, it's going to group by RFI number instead of schedule impact, and I'm going to have just one count in there, right? So it's just grouping by that RFI number and then grouping by schedule impact. And since, so it's not as pretty there, but different ways that you can sort and show that data. And then, yes, you can do in the reporting, this is a question for the sums. You can, instead of, I think this question is, if I wanted to put the count or something like that at the top of the page, so if I want to say in here, you can manipulate your report any way that you want, getting sums and summaries and counts and all that good stuff. So one kind of trick that you can do is if I put schedule impact back on the top and I export this to PDF one more time, it should give me my data that looks really good again. And then you could do something like, if I wanted to put something before this, I could reference other cells. So I might say, this equals cell A9. This is just being creative here with that question. That equals A9, which is going to reference this one. And let's say this one equals E9. So let's just reference that E9 in there. And then I can suppress this cell if I wanted to. Sure. And I can run that. And then I'll get that data instead of at the bottom of the report, at the top of the report. So different ways that you can show or highlight data, whatever you want to do within this to get the report that you're looking for. And then finally, the last question, lots of good questions here, hyperlinking to an RFI record. And yes, you could do that. I think I covered this in the last one. But any of these fields could be hyperlinked. Let's say the RFI number is important. So we want to create a hyperlink to an actual RFI. I would just add a formula for that. And you do have the option for a link. I'm going to say document link. So hyperlink is going to be external. Document link is going to take into effect the actual document. I can take RFI, put document link in there, comma. So it's going to say document link to this link using this, the field to display RFI number. Say okay. I can do that on multiple fields if I wanted, or the entire row if I wanted. But now I can either run that report. I think it will show up in blue. So I have that here, and I can click on this RFI number 2, and it'll actually open up RFI number 2 for me. So lots of ways to show those hyperlinks, and that is all possible. All right, everybody. I think that's the end of the questions that I saw so far. If you do have more questions, feel free. I think I have a link here to the pages, but you can send it to support if you're an existing user. If you're interested in learning more and you're not an existing user right now, check out our sales at ProjectTeam.com. We'll certainly have somebody reach out to you. But thank you all for joining today. I think that was a really good webinar. The whole series, I think, has been really beneficial to a lot of people. So I appreciate all that help put it together, and also those who have joined. We'll probably do another set of series. It's the end of April now, so maybe starting up in May, covering other topics and beginner topics versus advanced topics again. But yeah, thank you all for joining, and I look forward to hearing good feedback from everybody.